Aaron Rice with Concierge, and I want to welcome you to another amazing presentation for Baltimore Climate Tech 2025. And I've got my good friend Jonathan here on the line. Jonathan, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
My name is Jonathan Moore. I'm the founder of an organization called Rowdy Orbit, well, a for-profit company called Rowdy Orbit. What we focus on is leveraging digital infrastructure as being the foundation to really building out smart communities and making sure that we lead the assets within the neighborhood. So that way, when we start to pull back, we go from ownership to management, but the community goes from being program managers to ownership of the assets that we're leaving behind. And so we're currently doing that here in Baltimore City. We're looking to expand in a couple of areas around the world that have focus on indigenous populations. They have a really refined culture where they really want to focus on how do we take this digital infrastructure and we make it ours, but also what does a 20 to 25-year plan look like?
Got it. So I'm taking notes as questions as you're speaking.
Okay.
I've often heard you talk about you've really hammered it home the importance of data sovereignty, community ownership of data. Why is that so important, number one? And like, what does the community do with it? Why is the community demanding or wanting this data?
Because I think that a lot of when the information is plucked out of community, it's undervalued. And so I look at that as being an asset, and it's something that someone has easily given away, but they don't truly understand its value.
Hmm.
And when we start to talk about community and assets and all these other things, they're used to, they'll give you a $25 gift card for something that has a 10x or 15x multiplier,
Okay.
and it's kind of like, okay, well, then how you're going to benefit off that data. Well, if I knew exactly what you're going to do with it and the value that it had for the long term, maybe I might negotiate with you a little bit differently. And so instead of that $25 be a gift certificate going to a bunch of individuals, how does that become an investment from the community that we can take that money and reinvest it the way that we see fit? And so it's just changing that narrative in that conversation because now it's, even though it's an underserved community, there's still people.
Right.
Even though it's an unserved community or whatever label you want to put them under this current administration, they're still people and they still bring value to the table. And
Mhm.
so it's always been my quest to really push on, instead of the deficit narrative, how do we look at this from an asset driven narrative? Because you need these individuals in order for you to get your six figure salary.
Hmm. Got it. Got it. So, this is our second year doing Baltimore Climate Tech Plus. Last year, we focused on commercial properties, really, going deep on the Maryland Climate Solutions Now Act, which is a newer law here in Maryland, and it's the most aggressive climate law in the country. It's a building energy performance standards law. And the thesis for last year was data, the building is the database. We were
Mm,
focused on the built environment. So the building is the database and data is the new gold. And so this year we're focused on, single family, multifamily sectors, and our thesis is, or our theme is, healthy, smart, high performance homes, the case for affordability, expansion, and innovation. And it's still kind of crossing over that the building is the data, like the built environment is generating data, whether we captured it or not, whether we validate it or not, who owns it is becoming a challenge. And I come from the real estate practitioner world. Data sovereignty and those types of things are terms that were fairly new to me before I met you. Community ownership of data were things
hmm
that were fairly new to me before I met you. But On the commercial side, because one of the challenges with the Maryland climate law is that, and it's the law that most building owners and corporate tenants that have properties above 35,000 square feet, they don't even know it exists, a lot of them. And so what it requires is that the owner needs to get energy data, energy usage data, greenhouse gas reduction data from the tenant of their building, whether it's commercial or residential, as long as it's
Hmm.
35,000 square feet or more. But there's nothing in the lease that says that the tenant needs to share that data with the owner. So that's what we call a split incentive, right? And
Hmm.
so what some tenants are starting to do is say, and we've heard, anecdotes of this. If you want my energy data, you got to pay me for it.
Yep.
And not only do you got to pay me for it, you need to sign this hold harmless that says, that you're holding me harmless because I'm not sure the accuracy of the data because I'm getting it from some third party.
Hmm.
So I could see where it kind of would happen in a glass office building in Harbor East and trickle down into, Fulton Avenue in Sandtown, Winchester. You know what I mean? Where now community is saying, not only do we want access to the data, we want the ownership of it.
Yeah, because it becomes to where's the fair and where's the compensation?
Yeah.
It's now that people are becoming a lot more intelligent about through social media platforms and platforms when the whole freemium thing started and when it was
That came
called
out of the
free.
gaming industry, right?
It came from it came out of
Yep.
Silicon
The
Valley.
Silicon Valley, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it came out of Silicon Valley because it was people were throwing up these free sites. They were no longer subscriptions,
Yep.
throwing up these free sites. And they were like, freemium model will never exist. It never be profitable. But what they didn't realize is that it was free because they were making money off the data, you know? And so once people started to understand, like, okay, you go into these social media sites, like say Facebook, you think that it's yours. But it's like, dude, read the terms of service. And you're
You,
not.
you are the product.
Exactly, exactly. And so you're going in and you thinking this is yours and you're sharing your life, you're sharing
Right,
everything.
right,
They're
right,
collecting all this information on you,
right,
all this
right,
information,
right.
crossing this information with your phone, what you watch, they know how you move, they know how you make your purchases and all this stuff. You basically have this repository of information that you can donate for free without any compensation.
And then they monetize it to advertise it via advertisements
Exactly.
to businesses. Yeah,
Advertisement or whatever. I mean, DOD, track you, whatever. Whomever wants it,
yeah,
there's value to it. But you don't understand the value that you're giving up. And the
yes.
same thing happens in community all the time. It's just like you don't understand the value. And so it just gets to a point. It's like, okay, well then, like I remember having a conversation with Microsoft a couple of years ago when Gerard Lanier, he started talking about the compensation, equitable compensation for data creators. And they started to look at people as not just freemium or just the people that just participated. It's like, how do you compensate people for their data? You
Mm-hmm.
know, and I think at certain points, people are going to start arguing or having conversations around how does data compensation play back into the economics and potential workforce development?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you start to look at it, because it's depending on your state laws, you can actually begin to argue at a certain point and challenge the terms of service that you're it's like a free internship,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but the people don't understand that value and what they're contributing.
Yeah.
So therefore, how you start to regulate what the cost is based on how much time, what do you contribute, and start
Mm-hmm.
to really look at those things.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can start to look at this as like, okay, well then if I'm putting in my time and I'm giving up all this information for free, obviously somebody wants it. And so if you want me to be a contributor, well then you have to pay the data creator and you
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure there's a level of compensation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mean I'm all for that And I think that was switched the paradigm, greatly switched the paradigm on the Silicon Valley organizations or companies becoming billionaires or multi-billionaires when you got to pay out hundreds of thousands of people, hundred millions of people, um, and they've got to get a check based on how much they compensate, how much
Mhm.
you compensate them. And so they're starting to become this push out in the area of Silicon Valley where people are starting to create social media platforms where they basically pay you X amount based on how much you contribute to their platform.
Right, right. So, okay. So, Rowdy Orbit.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, the origination of that name, where does it come from? And tell us the genesis. Let's go back.
Okay, this was actually, a non-drinking moment. Um, it was,
Did you have an afro back then when you came up with it, or?
no, I didn't.
Okay.
This has just been like, oh, damn near, I was born bald, so
Oh,
it just stayed with me. You know?
that's funny.
Yeah. So it was, I had I was playing around with the name of an organization because I was like, I didn't want it to be I didn't want it to be very ethnic because back then when people were starting stuff, it was always ethnic something soul
Hmm.
or ethnic. It had like tribal African terms behind. I'm like,
Hmm.
sometimes I don't really understand it, and I
Hmm.
can't really pronounce it, so that just doesn't
Hmm.
make sense. And I wanted something that just played into my character,
Right.
and so I was playing with this name. I was playing with colors. And I've always been fascinated with the colors around orange and yellow. I
Hmm.
said, because to me, they just stand out and they're very pronounced
Hmm.
and they're
Hmm.
very defined.
Hmm.
And I started playing with the name and I literally had Rowdy on one sheet of paper and Orbit on another sheet of paper. And one day I was just getting so frustrated, took the paper, threw them up, came down, Rowdy, one paper, Rowdy was underneath
No,
Orbit.
come on, man. There was no,
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 no.
no, 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 no,
That's
no, 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 no,
exactly.
no, no. That
That's
sounds like a
exactly.
great story to
No,
talk
no,
over at
I'm
a bar, but that
serious.
is not how
I
you
was.
came up with your.
That's
Come
exactly.
on, man.
Rowdy was down, and then Orbit landed right on top of him, and I was like, Rowdy Orbit. I'm like, that's fucking stupid. And then after a while, I started thinking, I was like, that's kind of cool. And I remember I was doing someone's radio show, and I was like, we were on our way there. I'm like, I got to define Rowdy Orbit.
Right.
So before we got 10 minutes before we got to the radio show, I was like, and it took me a couple of years to be able to get this down. I still jack it up. And I was like, yeah, Rowdy represents the shakeup of an end product, and Orbit represents the well-rounded strategic thought process to support the end product. They're like, oh, you put a lot of thought in there. I was like, I can pull that one off. So it was literally it was that's it. That's how it happened. And
That's how it's
then
done, folks.
yeah. Oh, it was I got lucky. And my good friend at the time, he's a graphic designer, and we were talking about the name Rowdy Orbit and what does it mean. And he came up with the logo um back like in 2000, 2001. And I'm like, dude, that's a kick-ass logo. I'm gonna keep it. I said, I don't know if it represents anything, but it's just kick-ass. And it just all stuck. And
and,
it's just
and
really that simple.
and the URL was available.
Yeah, the URL I look for on purpose
Yeah,
because I said
that's step number one, right?
no, that was like two
Oh, step.
years ago.
Okay. Oh,
2 years
okay.
ago.
Okay. Okay.
Because I said, I'm tired of being a .com, a .co.
Yeah.
You always something.
Yeah.
And I've been playing with figuring out the names of something that the name could be its own URL.
Yeah, because your URL, it's not a .com. It's how do you what is it? Rowdy, it's rowdy dot orbit, right? Or something like that.
No,
How
it's
do rowdy
rowdyorg.it.
got it right.
So it's a vanity URL.
Hmm.
And I was
Hmm.
like, this is actually pretty cool. So the name of it would be the URL.
Hmm.
and there we go.
Hmm.
But it took, it still takes people a lot of time to get used to the name being a URL,
Right.
because they're used to the .co,
Hmm.
.com,
Hmm.
.org, something. But
Hmm.
I just wanted to get away from that. So I was like, and I started playing with names where the name can either be .us,
Hmm.
.edu,
Hmm.
or there was a the name, the last three letters were org,
Hmm.
or an IT. And so just being able to play around with them and just kind of just structure and just having fun with it.
Right.
And so like 2 years ago, I was like, let me see if this is available. I was like, damn, this is available, and I snatched it up.
There you go. So then the work that Rowdy Orbit does, when I think of what your company does, it's more so making sure that everyone has access to, you know, internet data streams, IoT access. Um, am I defining it horribly, or how would you define what Rowdy Orbit does?
It's all those things, but we try to find an efficient way to make sure that it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And how do we make sure that we reduce your out-of-pocket costs to virtually nothing for the end user? Because
Hmm.
I think it's vitally important, because we really focus on being in neighborhoods where it's less than household income is less than 39,000.
Hmm.
And so we want to put ourselves in a position where we have to strategically think through what we're doing before we do it, because we have to think about people that make $39,000 less per household. They don't have a lot of money, and some people might be able to survive and be able to get by and be able to manage their bills and the social economics of the household. But if we give them another $20 that they have to pay and tell them that it's a necessity,
Hmm.
is it really a necessity for them,
Hmm.
or is it an
Hmm.
additional expense?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so we had to really think through what we do before we actually do it. And we were inspired by a book. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's called Fortunes at the Bottom of the Pyramid.
Mm. Okay.
And it just talks about creating products for the poor,
Mm.
and how people are doing it from around the world. And so I was like, this is actually, this would be a great model for us to really think about, because when you think about infrastructure, it's incredibly expensive.
Hmm.
It's like buying screws from, I mean, the federal government purchases screws from somebody. It's like a normal screw is like $8, but an infrastructure screw, it's like 50 something dollars. It's just,
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
just, it's just like crazy cost.
Hmm.
So it was like, okay, well then, how do we make sure that we don't pass those expenses down to the individual, that it would impact their monthly expenses to a point where they have to make a decision about something.
Hmm. 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 So
And
then,
so
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
then that's when we start talking about broadband infrastructure, and then realize that, okay, well then, if we're going to create products for the poor, we have to monetize in other ways. So how
Hmm.
do we bring in health IoT products? How do we think about smart neighborhoods,
Hmm.
within a hyperlocal distance, within a 2.5 mile radius?
Hmm.
And how do we begin to monetize so that way we can have a profitable company,
Hmm.
and we can be able to afford to give people health care at a certain point?
Hmm. So I heard you mention, smart neighborhoods. It kind of, rings a bell, with our theme of smart homes. And when we think of smart homes from because we very much are in the health and wellness space. I take my indoor air quality monitors with me everywhere.
Yeah,
Wherever you see me, I've got an
yeah,
indoor air quality monitor with me
I
on.
know.
And we've been in some buildings where the air quality is great, and most of the time it's not, unfortunately. Uh,
Hmm.
and I won't mention where we were last night, but it wasn't too good, unfortunately. But you know, when we talk about smart homes, we're talking about, monitors that monitor the air quality. If you have radon or high carbon dioxide, particle matter, volatile organic compounds, relative humidity, temperature, that just kind of automates the process of bringing in more fresh air, humidifying or dehumidifying the air so that you're comfortable, um, you know, get, filtering out the particle matter, or just bringing in fresh air, and it does it kind of autonomously. Um, how are you thinking about? I know you mentioned smart neighborhoods. Are you entering into the like the smart home space, and kind of what do you think about that space, and where Rob Orbit could potentially play in that sandbox?
Yeah, so we're actually starting to make our leaps into the space now. And we found like a more of like an analog way to get there,
Hmm.
to make sure that, because we said if we're bringing aspects into people's homes, that people have to get used to seeing us in their home,
Hmm.
and we have to be able to bring value. And so
Hmm.
the one way we're starting is like working with community-based organizations and growing plants. Um, and I think it's like and trying to
In
figure out
indoor outdoor plants.
indoor plants,
Okay.
and just trying to figure out what are the indigenous plants that we can do within this environment, as well as another environment out west that we can work with community-based organizations where we can begin to create IoT products to test the soil to make sure the soil's good as well as the air quality. Work with community-based organizations, put these plants in order to put these plants into the homes, so that way we can monitor the air quality because we can't put just um was it air purifier.
Hmm.
You could, but people may not be able to afford the sensors. I mean, not the sensors, but the filters. And
Yeah.
you go
Yeah,
ahead.
the air purifiers are not cheap. I've
No, they
got
are.
one on every floor of my home, and they are expensive. Shout out to IntelliPure, made in Syracuse, New York, my hometown. And they only resolve the particle matter part of it. If you've got high carbon dioxide, volatile organic compounds, humidity, temperature, they don't help with that. Radon, they don't help
Hmm.
with that. Just particle matter. And yeah, they can get pretty expensive. But the plants, I love that idea. I think what I've seen in my research is that 6 to 8 plants per person
Yeah.
do wonders for generating clean air. And I guess there's a certain type of plants that work best with others. Big leaf plants, I guess. But I love that idea of really getting more plants into the home.
Yes, so we said, by doing it that way, now the community is going to be responsible for planting the plants, and it's specific plants. So your out-of-pocket cost is now your time, which is still valuable.
Yeah.
Now you get to put your hands in the earth and
Mm,
plant your own solution.
mm,
And you're right,
mm.
8 plants per person. And
Yep.
we said from that, now when we start to collect the data, there's a reason for us to bring in to train people to become data and citizen
Yep.
scientists,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
because now we're measuring indoor, and we're measuring soil.
Right.
And so now when we start to look at that data and then start to retrieve that information and help us in working with Be More Collab or American Collaboratory over at Hopkins,
Hmm.
and having research and validate, it's like, okay, well then now research will help to validate the next capability that we should offer because
Hmm.
it's rooted in science
Hmm. Hmm.
rather than rooted in hypothesis. But
Right.
also working with the community, they're going to tell us what should we be doing next.
Hmm.
And so we said if we were able to put plants in, now when we bring technology into the home, people are used to seeing us, and
Right.
we're coming in with a low cost solution. So it's just not coming in with like, okay, here's a ventilator for your whole entire home that you could do your HVAC system and all that other stuff.
Right. Hmm.
We're still saying, let's start small and use this
I love that.
opportunity to get there. So that way, if we're doing this every year for 20 something years, now say if we're able to develop some type of like working with you, it's like we're going to contact you on this part. With the air quality sensors, it's like, okay, well then now say if we develop something that we do something health IoT that's related to diabetes,
Mm,
people are going to be used to seeing that solution,
Right.
but it's technology driven.
Hmm.
And so it goes back to placing those strategy that I actually used this strategy. I came up with a strategy on how do you start to look at community engagement a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And I broke it down to three parts in order to get to an ROI. And I said, if you look at the first part as a prefix, what do we talk about the demographics of the people? And
Hmm.
how do you get a little bit granular on that? So it
Hmm.
becomes human.
Hmm.
Because often the technology is the hero, but the people are the hero to make sure the technology works.
Hmm.
And then in the second part, I said, okay, how do we construct a narrative that's friendly and not using any type of jargon whatsoever? How do we start to build out that narrative? And I said, okay, well, then the narrative is we want the people involved.
Hmm.
We want the people to put their hands in the dirt and get
Hmm.
dirty.
Hmm. Hmm.
Third part is okay, what is the impact in the technology that's going to drive the data?
Hmm.
Now, by doing this, it's kind of like, okay, we know that the people themselves, they don't have a lot of money. What is a low cost solution that's going to bring the community together? That they're going to help, they're going to accept us going to their home in order to put this technology that's going to clean out the air, so that way they can see a benefit.
That's
And so
sustainable. That's sustainable.
exactly,
Hmm.
exactly. And
Hmm.
it
Hmm.
costs people nothing but their time.
Right. Right.
And the adverse of that is that we're building community cohesion
Hmm.
because we're bringing people together. We're entering language into the community about clean air and what does clean air look like. And
Right.
so the community is involved in the process, but we're also leaving that CBO with a program to how do we begin to monetize that data.
Hmm. Hmm. So I love that idea. I love the idea of using indoor air quality monitors to validate. It's the benchmark,
Hmm.
figure out where we are, where we currently are, and then so there's some sort of retrofit that happens both in commercial and residential properties. And then it's the validation tool at the back end
Yep.
to really make sure that you got what you paid for.
Hmm.
And if you're getting some sort of third-party environmental certification on a property, they are not cheap. They are very
Hmm.
expensive. Some of them can be five figures.
Wow.
Energy Star is free. You got to pay for a validator, 1,500 bucks or whatever, but some of them can be, five, six figures to get these environmental certifications. Where does on-site food production in some of these food deserts play into your plans as well, if at all?
So no, they do because it's kind of like, well, we need to work with a community-based organization or grassroots organization that has land, flat out.
I'm thinking of on-site. Well, I guess if you're in an apartment type scenario without a deck or any outdoor space, that would be difficult. But if you were in a, say, if you're renting a home and you've got a backyard, you've got some outdoor space. That's what I was thinking of. But you're thinking more of a community garden.
Yeah, it
So,
definitely
okay,
needs to be a community garden because it
okay,
needs to be because you we have to look at the amount of plants that are going to be needed because if it's 8 plants per person, say if they're like a couple people in the household, I mean you're talking about like 20 something over 20 something plants.
yeah,
And okay, well then how do we make sure those plants survive the winter? How often how do you make sure people care for the plants?
yeah,
There are gonna be plants that just die because people don't have a green thumb.
that's me. That's me.
Yeah.
Looks
Trust
dry to
me.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like, okay, we're gonna have to really get used to that level of logistics, but have that plot of land so that way we can get to a point where this becomes a great rhythm and we
Yeah,
figured that part out,
yeah,
you know and so we said, okay, well then if it's already the space and they have the land, now the communal space becomes not only just indoor but also outdoor.
hmm hmm So you were on a panel discussion at the Freddie Mac Grow America Home for USA Develop the Developer Academy, of which I was a a recent graduate back in November. You were on a panel, and one of the things you were talking about is when you're collecting this data and doing this research is, you know, validated, white papers, creating white papers on the work that you're doing, peer-reviewed white papers. Can you talk a little bit more about why that's so important and maybe the process as to how somebody kind of even does that if they don't have a connection with a John Hopkins or a Morgan or a Coppin or some other, higher ed institution?
Yeah, it actually came from a frustrating meeting that we team had been prepared. We were prepared for this conversation, and we presented all this great data, the information, this research that we found. And the one woman looks at me, she's like, "I refute the efficacy of this data." I was like, "Damn, that's a slick way of saying no. I ain't never heard that before." And I was like, "Okay, all right, okay, all right." So I got to figure out a way to get around that no. And so, and it still plays into my head to this day when I'm just like, I refute that because you pull that on somebody, it's like it shuts down right there.
Yeah. What do you say to that? Like,
Yeah. Uh, there's no
let me
rebuttal.
get back to you on that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's no rebuttal, and I was like, damn, that's a all right. I got to find a way to get around to refute the efficacy of the data. And so during my Bunting Neighborhood Leadership Program over at John Hopkins Urban Health Institute, I started to think about start meeting researchers. And, they would always send me the stuff, and it was these white papers. And I was like, this shit is boring, you know? you know, it
Yeah.
was like reading
I gotta get up way early to read mine, like 5 a.m. I gotta be fresh. I can't after
yeah,
5 p.m. I can't read white papers. No.
yeah, after certain, it's not, it can't be number five on the list. Like you're right, it's number one.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and I was like, okay, this is actually pretty cool. I said, well, what if we start moving this way? And the first white paper we wrote was the internet being a social determinants of health. And I started using that, and it started to shut down aspects of the conversation because I started quoting the data that John Hopkins public health students started to produce. So, one, you're not going to argue with John Hopkins. That's it.
Well, you could, but
Yeah.
yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but it's like, okay, well, then you're
Wow.
not going to tell me I refute the efficacy of the data.
Right, 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 right.
That ain't coming up.
Right, right, right.
And so I started to develop these hypotheses, and I was like, okay, well, then I can actually use this hypothesis to work with researchers to develop a white paper um, around this thing. And so I really started doing that, and I started to start sending these things out in emails and everything else. And it just gives you it's a different conversation, and it cuts out the all right, well, we want to say we don't want to validate his data, but we can't because here it is right here.
Right.
And so once I started using it as more of like an intellectual marketing and conversation piece, then I said it has value. Now
Hmm.
I understand how to use research. And so I'd say for people, the best way to do it is to come up with your hypothesis, um, and find out whatever college in your area, what who has a program where their goal is the researcher is always doing work in the community.
Hmm.
You know, you can go to every school has those individuals, and you have to you sometimes you just have to show up and start
Hmm.
asking questions, go to some
Hmm.
of their events and start asking
Hmm.
questions and meet
Hmm.
these individuals.
Hmm.
And it takes time. But
Hmm.
once you get started with one, then then they'll introduce you to another person that's
Hmm.
more like-minded. And then
Hmm.
they'll introduce you to another person. And
Hmm.
you keep on having these relationships, keep on going to a point where we produce a white paper, almost every year. Or sometimes we produce two white papers, and it's great. And I tell people that that are just starting out, it's like, okay, when you're producing a white paper, you know, you want to be able to work with a group of individuals. Either you want to make sure that it's either in public health to start, or something that's directly related to your industry, or yeah, something directly related to your industry. So that way you know how to manage the people, the classroom that's writing your white paper.
Mm.
But then when you get into it, make sure your name of your organization is either, say, the data point is here, your
Hmm.
name is either the paragraph before or the
Hmm.
paragraph after.
Hmm.
So that way, when people read it, your name is associated with that data point.
So how much does it cost to do these white papers? Is it thousands of dollars or do you have a ballpark?
No, they're free. It's just
Oh,
time.
oh,
So
okay.
you pick a class, you find the academic, and usually they want to make sure their class does something that's based in the community.
Right, right.
And so you're like, okay, well then let's talk about, like, say with this uh doing social terms of health, broadband being social terms of health.
Hmm.
Well, for these kids, it's like they get to interact with community members. They get to
Hmm.
interview community members.
Hmm.
They get to leave the campus, go
Hmm.
to community meetings, which they
Hmm.
want to do big time,
That's right. That's right.
and they want to be around the action, and they
Hmm.
want to have the real conversations with people,
Hmm.
and use that as a learning classroom.
Hmm.
Like I remember one time we went out to the community, and it was two gentlemen and three women, and the gentleman kept talking over the women. And the guy said, uh, we need to stop this. He's like, because you're being disrespectful.
Hmm.
And he broke it down. He's like, listen, I'm a person that spent a lot of time behind the wall in jail.
Hmm.
The only person that really showed up for me on a continual basis was my mother.
Hmm.
And when I see men over talking women and women not contributing, to me, it's a disrespectful environment.
Hmm.
And that went on their head. That was like a And it became this huge learning lesson for them on how to engage community. And it was something that they wrote up in their response that they just raved about, because they had never been in front of community where it was, they're used to, from an academic standpoint of view, from Privilege University, being able to go in and say, we're going to do this, and this. But then when you start to change their thought process and, like, no, that's not how it works. That's what the book told you.
Hmm.
Now, this is how it really works.
Hmm.
And so now when you get in front of someone and you're in a diverse group, I guarantee you from that point forward, you're all going to make sure that everyone in that group can contribute. And it's like little things like that that make the big difference.
Yeah.
And just how you move through neighborhoods, you can talk to them about, well, don't move through the neighborhoods with a certain level of privilege that you're accustomed to.
Hmm.
And then you break that down to them,
Hmm.
you know? And there's also aspects of making sure that, was it, you listen, then you do talking.
Right.
Always be engaged and lean forward
Hmm.
versus leaning back.
Hmm.
And it's the little nuances that you train people,
Hmm.
that becomes a value for them. And they
Hmm.
really start to get into it.
Hmm.
And really start to get into developing their white paper, because it's like, okay, I get my name on something that's a product that I can use in my CV.
Hmm.
I'm getting deep context of being around community, and
Hmm.
I'm being challenged in a way that I never, the right way versus the book way.
Right, right. So I've got more questions than we have time. I apologize, and we've actually gone over time. But I have two more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So you brought up the social determinants of health about three times in that last answer. I appreciate that because the number one determinant of health is home, right?
Hmm.
Um, I've started doing research on healthcare community benefit dollars that is part of the Affordable Care Act, and nonprofit healthcare organizations are required to contribute X amount of dollars back into community. Um, are you exploring that pathway at all as a way to add to your capital stack and create out of the box kind of financing options for some of your projects, or kind of where are you with that? Because I know, John Hopkins is a nonprofit hospital, and you can go to see their Schedule H to see how much they spend every year, whether it's John Hopkins or other institutions, on community benefit. And it's quite a lot. Where are you in regards to looking at that as an option?
We're about 4 years from that. 4 years from that. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because if we're starting with plants going to the home, in order to get health IoT products, it's going to take time for us to get to that point. And I want to be able to validate so that way they can't refute the efficacy of the data. I will never forget the term for the rest of my life, and you won't
Like,
either. You
you
can't
got
unsee
trauma. You have been traumatized.
it. I guarantee you, use that on somebody. See what happens. Use that on your kids
I
and see
just
what
I'm
happens.
gonna stand up at the next meeting and just I'm
Yeah, I'm telling you, find a reason to use it so that way you can see the pain in someone's face when they cannot come back from that.
well,
And you will not unsee
I highly encourage you to
it.
Amanda Reedy is the executive director for the Center of Healthy Housing, and she is one of our presenters this year as well.
Okay.
And they've written many white papers on healthcare community benefit, and that was the title of her presentation this year. So
Mm.
she gave, loads and loads of resources and links and case studies of in Boston, Ohio, and Bon Secours, Grace Medical Center, of how they're really engaging with community
Mm.
and providing either direct resources, financial resources, or being a guarantor for private financing. But it's a very innovative way to look at engaging community and working with those types of institutions. So I highly encourage you to check that out. My last question is,
I was gonna say, can you introduce me?
oh, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to.
Perfect.
I'd be happy
Thank
to.
you.
And guess where they're located? The Center for the this was it the oh my God, I can't, the Center for Healthy Housing. What do you know where they're located?
No, where?
Columbia. How many times have we probably passed their office when we had lunch in Columbia? We probably passed their office and didn't even realize it. The
Oh
National
wow.
Center for Healthy Housing, located in Columbia, Maryland. Um, Open door policy, free technical assistance, a huge resource for tapping into and working with and collaborating with these nonprofit healthcare organizations that are legally obligated, well, as of today, legally obligated to make these contributions back into the community. My last question, that fluorescent sticker in the background, what does it say?
Which one? This?
No, the green fluorescent one. Keep going, keep turning. Keep turning. No, that one. What's that one?
Oh, ROI. So that's part of the mathematical formula that I kind of so I think in post-its,
Okay.
and then I moved from post-its to mind maps to nodes. And then from there, to actually writing on pad, pen and pad, uh, and then eventually to a computer.
Well, hey, I know I was curious. I know somebody else is curious. I wonder what that sticker says in the back.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, 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 yeah. So it's a return on investment. So the whole process is it's a post-it and it says the prefix.
yep.
Then the
He's taking
post-it
them
says
down.
narrative.
They won't stick though anymore. Take 'em
Yeah. Oh, they'll stick. I got tape to make sure they stick. This piece is the suffix, and that's the ROI.
So, I mean, gosh, what a way to end the conversation, because at the end of the day, it really is about ROI and payback period. Because if it doesn't make sense, if you can't make the business case for it, then you're gonna have a hard time being able to get some traction.
Yeah, then it's not sustainable.
Yeah, yeah. Jonathan, man, this was great. Your thought leadership, your subject matter expertise is something I've highly respected since we met a couple of years ago, thanks to Lindsay, who introduced us. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for contributing your time to Baltimore Climate Tech 2025.
Dude, thanks for asking. Because last year I was intimidated. I'm like, no, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Ain't no way I'm ready.
Is he ready, folks? He's ready. He's ready.
Man,
And
I appreciate you, Aaron.
I'll be asking again for Climate Tech 2026. So
I'll have white paper. Because we will not refute the efficacy of this data.
I appreciate you, man. Have a good one.
All right, thanks for time. You do the same.